Hi, I'm Linda, and this is No Frills ASMR. I've missed you guys. You may not have missed me because I had scheduled videos for about the last week and a half, I think, because I've been in Tennessee at my parents' house, and I took a little time to just hang out with family. And I'm actually still here. I had planned to be home today to make a video, but it's raining. I didn't want to drive in the rain, so I've set up here at my parents'. If it sounds a little different or anything. And so anyway, I'll film here today. I had a video scheduled, but I didn't like the video. But I thought, let's do something crazy. Probably controversial, I don't know. But I read, I don't know, somewhere that in Florida they're talking about taking away vaccine mandates in the public schools, I believe is what it is. I didn't really read the article, I read the headline. Sorry. But it just got me thinking about, I saw in the comments people saying about bringing the iron lung back and all this stuff, and it got me thinking about the iron lung. And I can't remember if maybe I already did a video about the iron lung. I couldn't remember, and I didn't bother to look it up because I thought, well, if I don't remember, certainly a lot of you wouldn't remember either. So anyway, I just thought we could talk a little bit about polio and the iron lung, because as time goes by and we all become further and further away from the realities of some of these diseases, it's easy to not understand how dangerous they can be. But at the same time, I wanted to kind of look it up because what is the reality that polio is going to come raging back to the U.S.? Not that great, probably. So I thought we could just talk about the realities because, the hype is one way or the other, just so hyped. It can be kind of scary. And I think calming those nerves is always good. And it's an interesting subject. Wow, that was a long intro. I just want to say one other thing. I'm in Tennessee, and some of you know, for reasons I can't explain, I don't have ice cubes at my house. And my mom has a fancy ice maker on her refrigerator. So I'm excited to have some icy cold water. What a thrill. All right, so first of all, I know that most of you understand where I'm coming from. My dad has Alzheimer's, and so I try to find a subject that I find interesting and kind of go on a little deep dive to learn about it and then share it with you. But I'm not like a doctor, a scientist, or anything of that nature. So that's that. And I'm sure if I title this anything to do with polio, there'll be people in the comments who have things to say about that. I will say that I know that there is a narrative that vaccines cause autism. That is based on a study from the 1990s that was completely debunked, but also retracted. And they've done dozens of studies since then, and they have found no link between those things. And I just recommend, doing a real deep dive on that, because I feel like that is something that's being shared so much and by people who could look it up. So I'll just say that, so you know where I'm coming from. I don't want to be disingenuous or anything. And I have, some of you know, I sometimes listen to Joe Rogan. more in years past. Then recently I haven't, because he moved over to Spotify and I'm on Apple Podcast. But I know he kind of did a whole thing about how sanitation is what cured polio. That's not accurate. Polio really raged during the 40s and 50s, and sanitation was well established, and people, because of the epidemic, were being extremely cautious, and they don't line up. The surge in polio is well after sanitation was well known about. I mean, germ theory had been around for a long time, and the complete, basically, eradication of polio happened after the vaccinations. So I'm just putting that out there too. All right, so I got this paper to use, and it appears it has previously been used by my children. So I think I was looking up, and I was like, when were the first cases of polio found? And I think in Egypt, like in the 1500s, there was writings about it, What was it, scratched on a wall? I don't know. But by 1789, sorry, my throat is dry. I was out working in the field yesterday, literally. In 1789, there was a British physician named Michael Underwood, and he wrote about a debility of the lower extremities. So he was kind of starting to see cases of polio back then. But in around 1948 until 1955, that is when in the U.S. and Canada and other places, but we're kind of talking about the U.S., there was an epidemic of polio. And I was talking to my mom about it because she was very much alive during that time. And she has such clear memories of, not being allowed to go to the swimming pool or hang out with groups of friends. She talks about her grandmother would have family parties on the farm, and they'd basically set up, some sawhorses with the board across and put all the food out, and everybody'd gather around to have a party. And if a single fly landed on anything, Grandma would grab it up and just throw it in the garbage, because they were so worried about polio, because so many children, had gotten polio, and it was contagious. And what it would do is cause, first of all, for a lot of people, they might not even know they have it. It was, for some people, it was not a problem, or they just have very minor, symptoms. It wasn't a big deal. But for other people, it could lead to paralysis of limbs, or of your, what's the word I'm looking for that you breathe with? Your diaphragm and your chest muscles could become paralyzed, which means you can't breathe. And that's horrifying. And thousands of children, they were mostly affected children and young adults, and thousands of children and teenagers died each year during these years. Young adults, I don't know, whatever. But they think like over 10,000 people died during this time of polio, and it was just really scary when you're worried that your child can end up in like this. But what they did for children who had a paralysis of the chest or the diaphragm, they'd put them in what was called an iron lung. And what an iron lung is, imagine like they used to call it an iron casket, I think, but imagine like a box. And there's a hole here, and you can look them up and see pictures, and then here is your child. Wow, that's terrible. What? Here's your child's hair in their eye. And then the body is inside of my art skills are on display right now. All right. And what would happen is the iron lung would have air pressure. So it would build pressure and release the pressure, which would make the lungs inflate and deflate. It would do the work for you. And I listened, and I think this is what I talked about previously, to an episode of the podcast Radio Diaries, which I highly recommend, not only because it's fascinating, but because the host's voice is like super ASMR. If you like that kind of male, quiet voice, he's great. But he did a Radio Diaries with a woman named Martha Lillard, and she is to this day like the last living person who still uses an iron lung. And she talked about how during the day she can get away with using, like, what do they call that? A CPAP or something, something where you breathe oxygen. But she said it's so much work because it doesn't do the breathing for you. So at night, she still sleeps in her iron lung. And she said as soon as she gets in, it's like this huge relief because it's doing the work of the breathing for her. And she's just like, it just is such a relief. And now she has trouble finding the parts for her iron lung. And my mom reminded me too, growing up in the 1970s in Royal Oak, Michigan, there was a guy on our street, I think, or in our neighborhood, a man. I think he'd been a child in the 50s and he was a man. He was in an iron lung permanently. And every time the power went out, there was chatter and about what they would do because his iron lung wouldn't have power. I don't know. It's a weird memory. I'm like, oh yeah, I do remember that. I remember everybody talking about him, and he lived like near us. But anyway, so yeah, the Martha Lillard, she talks about still using it, and she talks about her memory was so clear. I highly recommend this Radio Diaries. Look it up with Martha Lillard. But she talks about when she was a little girl, her parents wouldn't let her, you weren't allowed to go to the swimming pool because there was a lot of thought that polio was transferred through water from swimming pools. But it was her birthday, and so they made a special arrangement for her and her friends to meet up at the pool and have a day swimming at the pool. And it was like just wonderful because they really hadn't been able to meet up with friends in a long time, and it was just going to be so great. And she says the next day after the pool that morning, she was laying in bed and she thought she could hear her parents in the other room talking and making breakfast. And she said she knew, because of the way she felt and that she couldn't move herself, she had polio. And she was like 10 years old, I think. And she didn't want to call her parents because she wanted to have this one last moment, because she really kind of thought she'd die, because a lot of people did. And so finally she called her mom and said something's wrong, and sure enough she had polio. And then she was in an iron lung for a long time, I think, before they kind of helped her retrain a little bit her lung muscles. Anyway, what a story. Story. Crazy story. So that's kind of the iron lung part of it. In the United States, since the year 2000, they have used what's called only an inactivated vaccine, which means that it is not a live vaccine. And so even if a lot of people decide to forego the vaccine, as long as there are enough people who are getting it. So with the disease threshold with polio, is, I read, 80 to 86% still get vaccinated of children. That should be able to keep it from coming back. And I was like, well, how could it come back if it's pretty much eradicated? Is that the right word? I think so. In the US. And it seems that it is because in the US, they use an inactivated vaccine. There is no live polio in that vaccine. But in countries that are basically poor countries that don't have the same wealth that the US has, they are using what is called an oral polio vaccine. And it is a very, very small dose of live polio. And there's a very specific reason that they do. It's not like they do it just because they're like, yeah, let's give them money. It's, first of all, it's very inexpensive to do. It doesn't require a needle. You can take it orally. And that's a big deal in some countries where people don't trust, needles coming at them. So you can just put like a drop or two on the tongue and take it that way. But the main thing is it goes into the gut. So you have this very minuscule amount of polio in the gut, which of course then gets excreted, gets into the wastewater or the water system. And in some of these countries, sanitation isn't perfect. And so other people get little minute doses of the live virus, and that gives them immunity. So then you wipe it out in certain areas through immunity in that sense. Does that make sense? Now, occasionally, you could get actually live virus that can, expose other people. So it's a tricky thing. But overall, it causes a, what's the word I'm looking for? Immunity, herd immunity. Okay. There are only two countries where polio is still wild, and that is Afghanistan and Pakistan. Now, in New York City, there was a pocket of people who were unvaccinated in 2022, I think. And somebody came from a country with wild polio and brought the virus into that community. And people in that unvaccinated pocket did get polio. And one man is currently paralyzed from polio that he got in 2022. So it can come back. But if you have enough vaccinated people, it shouldn't be able to be transmitted. What's the word I'm looking for? But if you have pockets where people decide to not get it, it can start to become a problem in those pockets. So what I'm saying is, don't panic. It's probably not going to come raging back into society. But at the same time, if people get the polio vaccines in the US, I think right now it's a 3-vaccine regimen. If you get all 3, you'll have 99% immunity to polio, a disease that should be able to be eradicated because we have vaccines. And that can kill or paralyze you if you get it, your child. Yeah. And a lot of, famous people, Franklin Delano Roosevelt had it, and that's why he was paralyzed from the waist down. Ellen Alda, my favorite, had polio, and they gave him a therapy that apparently he said was very painful. Kind of interesting. Francis Ford Coppola had polio. A lot of it wasn't uncommon. In fact, didn't Mitch McConnell? That's why he has a limp. He had polio. And the other thing is, it's a virus, and chickenpox or other viruses, it can lie dormant for a long time and then kind of come back and cause you aching joints and pain later in life. So it's not really something to be trifled with. Well, let's talk about the original vaccine. So in 1950, well, the where did I put that piece of paper? So it was 48 to 55 that it was really raging in the United States. In 1952, Jonas, a doctor named Jonas Salk, started to work on a vaccine, and by 55, he had the vaccine, him and his, colleagues. And they came up with an inactivated polio vaccine. And I believe at that time they would put it on a sugar cube. They'd put some drops of the inactivated vaccine, and then you could go line up to get it. And my uncles, my mom's younger brothers, they were twins. They were one of the first group to get the sugar cube vaccine. And after that, later, one of my uncles had meningitis, and his doctor credited him having had the polio vaccine with maybe saving his life because he almost died of meningitis. But I don't know how that would work. I don't know if anyone's a doctor and has thoughts, or I don't know. But yeah. So by 55, they gave it a license in the U.S., and then the vaccine just took off. I mean, everybody wanted it because it was just so scary. And it was extremely effective and just knocked out polio very quickly after that. So now wild polio is eradicated, except, like I said, in Pakistan and Afghanistan, as far as I could tell. So, yeah, it's interesting. And then other vaccines came out. I should have remember all that, but I don't remember exactly all the rest. I think they said in the year 1994, they said it was eliminated in North and South America. So after 1994, so it would be really stupid if it came back again. Really? South and North America. Anyway, I don't know. What else do you guys think? I know people say that I've been saying stuff that's too whatever. I don't know. They call me a socialist or something. I don't know. But I don't think this is science in my mind, so I don't know. All right. Well, I think that's all I've got on that. We could draw an iron lung. Let's see. Oh, no, actually, I use this paper for notes from my dad, so I don't want to use that. Where's my iron lung picture? I'm sure I left off a lot of things. Yeah. There was another guy who spent like his whole life, he was on this Radio Diaries too. And I think he was in an iron lung full time, but he died in like they did an update, and I think he died in like 2024 maybe. But I think that her name was Martha Lillard. I think she's still alive. Lillard, I don't know. But yeah, it's a good episode. So if you kind of like this, let me know. We can talk about other measles, mumps, rubella, HPV. I'll talk about anything. I don't care. And, to be clear, vaccines aren't 100% without side effects. You can read them. They have label warnings. They can trigger immune systems, and sometimes that's good and sometimes that's not good. It depends. So you do want to talk to your doctor, obviously, before anything. So people would be in these things and they'd go to, sometimes they'd have school in here, they'd eat their meals, watch TV. There was that movie about a woman who, what was it? Was she playing game shows or the lottery? She was like lottery winner. I don't know. I don't think I ever saw it. And then nurses come in and open it up and would change them and sometimes roll them around a little bit, I think, people around so they wouldn't get, bed sores. I don't know how you don't get bed sores. Ugh, it just sounds terrible. I would hate it so much. Being locked in like that, that would be bad for me. Bad. Trying to think what other stories my mom told me. Because she knew people who had polio. And some people, they'd have a paralysis, but then they'd heal from it. But sometimes they'd still have like weakness on one side or a limp. But mostly what she remembers is just her mom, and being very nervous about. See, that's the thing, like, people are like, it wasn't that they had official quarantines, although they may have, I don't know. But it was just the parents were so aware of how dangerous it was, they would quarantine themselves, their kids. I think the swimming pool was the biggest thing because it could transmit through, poop. So you had to be really careful if you were in a situation like that where you could get it in your system. Sometimes I take my walk, I go around like old cemeteries, and back in the old days, I swear, you'll get the old gravestones and it's like all these young children from different diseases. It's like we've forgotten how scary it was to give birth. That was scary. And to just have children, there were so many things that could get you back in the day. We've been so safe for so long. I don't know. Anyway. Alright, guys. Well,